68, an all-encompassing digital network of podcasts, live streams, and newsletters that cover the sport at every level on every platform. SiriusXM Channel 84.
You are watching the Field of 68. For the first time, our network brings you a live game broadcast. Mike Bockwell for the win! Oh!
This is Bruce Pearl.
John Shire.
Sean Miller.
I love the Field of 68.
I listen to you guys every morning.
Are we still live?
UConn wasn't on my radar.
From the bluest of the blue bloods to the smallest of the mid-majors, the only way to keep up with college basketball is through the Field of 68.
Welcome back to the Champagne on Ice podcast here, presented by the Field of 68, Episode 2. I'm Kyle Tausk, joined, as always, by Mike Farmer, and it is a very happy episode here because Illinois just knocked off the number one team in the country in an exhibition game over at State Farm Center just a few hours ago as we're recording this. And boy, that was a fun basketball game. I know it was an exhibition, but that had the feel of a high-level basketball game between two really good teams. It did not feel at all like an exhibition. Both teams were playing really hard. Both teams played normal rotations. I mean, it felt like a real basketball game, and I know we'll discuss what it means here coming up shortly on the show. We'll also get to some Big Ten predictions later on after we break down this Kansas game. But first and foremost, Mike, how you doing tonight? How much did you enjoy watching that basketball game tonight?
I'm great, Kyle. Thanks for asking. That was a really fun game. Pretty much everything I was hoping for and a little bit more with that victory on top, of course. Atmosphere was great. Booing Dickinson a little bit. That was really fun.
Yes, sir.
The team just looked really good from top to bottom. All around, it was just really fun. Great game.
Dickinson moves to 0-5 against Illinois, which is great. This one definitely counts on the record. So in case anyone goes back in 20 years and looks at Hunter Dickinson's record, we are counting this one. I'm making sure that this one officially counts in the Hunter Dickinson versus Illinois record book because he thought he could go to Kansas, thought he could go to Bill Self and squeak one out here, leave his college career getting one against Illinois, but Illinois didn't let that happen tonight, and he didn't play particularly well, which we can get into. The way Illinois was defending the post, I thought was pretty encouraging. But let's just talk a little bit about this one. Obviously, you can take the overall result with a little bit of a grain of salt still. It's an exhibition game. We're not here to say that Illinois is the best team in the country because they beat Kansas in an exhibition. But to get a win, I mean, I didn't expect that. I thought it would be a competitive game. I thought we'd learn a lot. I didn't really expect Illinois to be the winning team at the end of it, and they were 82-75. Terrence Shannon Jr., 28 points. I mean, he was All-American caliber tonight, and I think that's where we need to start in this one because he was phenomenal, and he just carried Illinois. He got really hot from three. We've seen this a few times here during his Illinois career. He can get on a heater, and he can feel it. And from that right wing, he was feeling it. I mean, he found that same spot about 5 straight times and knocked down shots, and he was aggressive getting to the basket. I mean, 8 of 13 shooting, 5 of 9 from 3, 7 of 10 from the free throw line. That is an All-American caliber basketball player if he plays like that consistently. What did you make of Terrence Shannon and just any other overall takeaways from this performance?
Yeah, I think it's definitely smart to start with Terrence Shannon and his performance tonight. I think if there's one thing we learned or sort of like relearned from last year is that Terrence Shannon is going to have those nights, some nights where he just takes over, looks like an All-American. This year, like you said, he might actually be an All-American, which would be amazing. Excuse me. But yeah, 5 for 9 from 3. He had that little stretch at the end of the first half where he got to that right wing spot. We tweeted about it. Hit that step back over Dickinson, just looked beautiful. He was getting to the hoop too, also went 7 for 10 from the free throw line, which was encouraging or decent at least because the rest of the team definitely struggled from the free throw line per usual, which is an issue we'll talk about a bit later. But yeah, Terrence Shannon looked phenomenal. Defense was pretty good too. Shut down, I mean, McCullough had a great game, but Terrence Shannon kind of shut down his matchup for most of the night. And then on offense, of course, 28 points, 3 rebounds as well. Played a little bit of point guard down the stretch, which was encouraging to see because Ty Rodgers was on the bench for a little bit towards the end of the game. So, yeah, just all around great game from Terrence Shannon Jr.
Yeah, that battle from between him and McCullough was really fun. I mean, they were chirping each other all game. They were both teammates at Texas Tech. I mean, we were both there, and I'm sure we could both see they were getting into it, and that was fun. And they both had really good games. I think McCullough had 25, Terrence had 28, and yeah, I mean, for both those guys are really good defensive players. I chalk that up to those guys were just feeling it tonight, and I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, Terrence Shannon got cooked. I thought McCullough was just really good. Shannon was really good. It was a high-level matchup between two really good players. But I do want to hit on something that you mentioned there a second ago. Late in the game, I thought it was really interesting. That's kind of one of the biggest things that I learned from this one is we got to see this team in a really late game crunch time scenario, which I was very curious to see. What lineups was Brad going to go to? Is Ty Rodgers going to be out there late? He wasn't. Clearly, Brad didn't trust his free throw shooting late in the game. He ended up going with Justin Harmon and Quincy Guerrier late in the game. So you had fifth-year senior, fifth-year senior, fifth-year senior, fifth-year senior, fourth-year senior. That was your 5 that closed this game, a tight game that Illinois was trying to hang on to. You had a ton of experience out there. Wasn't all perfect. There was a couple times where Kansas pressured in the backcourt and Illinois was close to turning the ball over. Obviously, you'd love to have a point guard in that spot, but I thought that those experienced guys made some really good decisions there late. Justin Harmon had a really nice cut to the basket. Coleman found him for a key bucket. Damask handled the ball pretty well. I mean, he was kind of the backup point guard. Marcus Damask was pretty much your backup point guard tonight, which I thought was interesting to see. And then Guerrier, who he started in this game, which was a surprise. It switched the lineup up a little bit from that Ottawa exhibition. You go bigger against a bigger Kansas lineup. Guerrier plays, he starts and he finishes, and he was phenomenal in the second half. I mean, he had a stretch there where he scored 8 straight points, and he looked like the guy that was at Syracuse as a sophomore and averaged 13 a game in the ACC. So, yeah, obviously Shannon was the story, and he made the biggest plays of the night, and Coleman, we can touch on in a minute, I thought played a phenomenal game as well. But that closing lineup I thought was really interesting to see this team, all this experience on the court in a late game situation, protecting a lead. And I thought for the most part, it was pretty encouraging even without a point guard on the court.
Yeah, I was pretty surprised to see Domask actually bringing the ball up a couple times, like mid-second half. And then I was really surprised, mostly after the under 8 timeout, Ty Rodgers was pretty much on the bench, and they turned to Domask to be the point guard, which is not what I was expecting at all. But obviously, like you said, Ty Rodgers and free throws are a major concern, and it's late game, close game, so Brad's got to adjust to stuff like that. But yeah, Domask playing point guard, I think he had a pretty solid all-around game. He got some good buckets, had some offensive rebounds, ran the offense pretty decently. Didn't really turn it over towards the end of the game, which is pretty encouraging to see. And then, yeah, Quincy Guerrier, I had noted, after the first half, I was ready to call him, the highlight of the night. I thought he was pretty good getting to the offensive rebounds, grabbing rebounds, hitting the glass. He had a couple buckets. And then the second half, he just turned into a super aggressive player. He got to the line maybe 8 or 10 times, I want to say, in the second half. Put some points up, kept getting rebounds. He got fouled a bunch, just kept getting to the rim. Hit that clutch 3 towards the end. So, yeah, like you said, the experience was really key in this game. Obviously an exhibition, but still really encouraging to see some of the 4th and 5th year seniors just doing their thing and managing the game towards the end.
Yeah, I mean, I said on last week's episode that I was curious how much Guerrier was actually going to play. Was there a chance that he maybe was going to be the guy that his minutes got eaten into? He didn't play as much as we thought. But, man, after tonight, I mean, you see why you bring a guy like that in, and you see why the lineups and certain matchups may be very fluid for Brad Underwood, because you go into this Kansas matchup and you have Hunter Dickinson playing the 5 and KJ Adams playing the 4, who's 6'7", 240, really big physical 4-man. I mean, we even saw it for stretches of the game, like Luke Goody, that he can't handle that matchup. It's nothing against him. He just can't handle a bigger four-man like that. So you counter that with a guy like Quincy Guerrier, who's bigger, he's more athletic. And I thought he was great. I thought he was really good defensively. And I thought that, yeah, I mean, to see the aggressiveness from him on offense, which I think was a question mark at times for him at Oregon, he looked more like that guy at Syracuse who could actually light it up and score. And yeah, 10 free throw attempts. He was 8 for 10 from the free throw line. There's no reason he shouldn't be at the free throw line often, because he's big and he can score in the post, but he can also, we saw him attack from the perimeter and show some versatility there, playing the four next to Coleman, which I thought, yeah, I mean, I was curious what these lineups are going to look like. We've seen two different starting and closing lineups so far in the two exhibitions, and both, I think, in their own ways, within their own matchups, have been pretty encouraging. And yeah, I'm with you. I mean, you said after the first half you thought that, and then the second half, I mean, Guerrier, I think he was maybe the biggest. I mean, we knew Shannon and Hawkins are the two best players in the court, but we know what we're getting from those two guys. I thought the biggest standout performer was Quincy tonight, and that was pretty interesting to see and really encouraging, because if he can be that type of presence for Illinois, I think that just makes you all the more deeper and allows you to play even more experience late in the game. And the lineup versatility, I think, is really important. But the other thing I do want to hit on is kind of what we saw from the rotation. I mean, I was curious coming into this game, how real was this rotation going to look in this game? Are we going to see 12 to 20 minutes from everybody just trying to throw guys out there? Tonight, we didn't at all. This looked like a real rotation, as if Illinois was playing a game against Kansas in the regular season. You had your starters play big minutes. Terrence Shannon played 34 minutes. Coleman Hawkins played 29 minutes. You had Guerrier play 25. Damask played 29. Rogers played 25. You only had 8 minutes from Sincere Harris, 3 minutes from Dre Gibbs-Lawhorn, 10 minutes from Luke Goody, 2 minutes from Moretti, 2 minutes from Hansberry, 9 minutes from Dane Danger, which we can talk about a little bit too. But yeah, I mean, Brad kind of rode 7 guys tonight, and I thought that was very interesting, and is kind of a glimpse at, once these games get tight, once you're playing these high level games, this is what this rotation could shorten to. You have a lot of options, and that's not to say that those guys that played short minutes aren't ever going to contribute this year, but this is kind of we can see who's in Brad's circle of trust here early on.
Yeah, definitely. It was really interesting to see the rotations, especially late game. Probably not a surprise the freshmen, Dre Gibbs-Lawhorn and Hansberry, weren't getting any second half action, any late game action. They'll get their time in early season. You got some bye games early on. They'll get some minutes, of course. But then in terms of Sincere Harris, that was a bit surprising not seeing him too much. He didn't do too much in his minutes, so I don't know if that contributed to him not playing much in the second half. And then you got Luke Goody. He kind of had a bit of an off night. It's obviously a tough matchup guarding KJ Adams, who's like you said, massive athletic freak. He wasn't playing great. And of course, Terrence Shannon and Coleman were hitting their threes in the first half, which is kind of Luke's specialty, and Luke wasn't doing that tonight. So not totally shocking to see him on the bench a little bit. And then Dane Danger, I would say Hunter Dickinson's a brutal matchup. I'm not a fan of him, but definitely a top 5, top 3 big man in the country. So Dane Danger not having the best offensive night isn't too shocking. Not playing too much isn't crazy to me. Coleman also had a great night. Quincy had a great night. So it makes sense to see them guarding Dickinson and being in the game for long stretches towards the end. But yeah, not seeing Sincere and not much of Moretti, not much of Dre Gibbs-Lawhorn, not really shocking towards the end of the game. But I do really think it is interesting that Ty Rogers wasn't in the game towards the end, and having Domask especially playing point guard instead of somebody like Terrence Shannon. Even Justin Harmon was in the game a lot towards the end. Had that nice cut, like you said, got that layup towards the end of the game. So just really interesting to see, especially the backcourt decisions in terms of the rotation tonight, and something to keep looking forward to these next couple weeks, couple months.
Yeah, the backcourt was definitely interesting. Justin Harmon closed the game over Ty Rogers, which I I thought in the back of my mind, I thought that was a possibility because I was curious, and I mentioned it last week. Can you put Ty Rodgers on the court? I mean, Illinois was up like 3 with 4 minutes. I mean, he even came out earlier than that. Like you said, like the last 8 minutes, I don't think he played. But yeah, it's a really close game. It was tied a couple points, and Illinois was grasping to a 2-3 point lead there late. You can't have a 39% free throw shooter on the court. And I think that's what we saw. That, yeah, I mean, unless that really improves for Ty, even in games where he's good, I think it's going to be tough to get him on the court in those crunch time moments just because of that. And that's a really important deficiency that he needs to improve if he wants to be your point guard that's closing games for you. Underwood decided he's going with Justin Harmon, a fifth-year guy, but a guy that's never played a team like Kansas before. I mean, he's comes from Utah Valley, comes from community college. This was as good of a test that he's ever seen, and I thought for the most part, he looked pretty good. I mean, he made some really key decisions there. The cut was huge. That was just a veteran play. He also attacked the rim a few times, which I thought, he showed some burst. He showed some scoring ability there, which, I don't necessarily think this is a guy that's going to average 9-10 points a game off your bench. But if he can give you a little bit of scoring off your bench and he can hit some open shots, I mean, he gave me some Andres Feliz vibes a little bit tonight, where he's just kind of a really tough dude who's not going to make a lot of mistakes. He created some extra possessions and a couple offensive rebounds, gets to the rim pretty easily. Is not a guy that looks like it per se, but he got to the rim with ease a few times. And yeah, that cut was just like the typical Andres Feliz veteran. I'm just going to make the total right play here in a key moment of the game. So maybe that is a guy that could be on the court late. But yeah, you didn't see much of Dre Gibbs-Lawhorn. He played 3 minutes, turned it over once. He looked like he pulled up and took a tough three at one point in the game. Like, yeah, that's a freshman that's trying to get acclimated. Hansberry had a couple tough moments. And Moretti just, he played 2 minutes. I don't think he really was involved in much, missed 2 free throws. Yeah, I mean, those guys are going to have to earn it a little bit for sure. Wasn't totally surprised. I think when you look through this rotation, the 3 freshmen are the guys that, yeah, if they're not proving it, if they're not coming out and giving you something, then they're probably not going to play a whole lot until they do prove that. Yeah, that was of note for sure. But yeah, the backcourt situation I think is going to be fluid, and I do think that, at least to start the season, until something is proven at the foul line or something changes or there's a certain matchup that Brad really likes, Ty Rodgers probably isn't going to be that guy in the backcourt late in games. And maybe Justin Harmon proved that he can be that guy. But and really, like you said, it was Marcus Damask who was playing the quote unquote point guard there late, even though they were running things through a lot of different guys.
Yeah, Ty Rodgers not playing late game kind of hurts the Illini, obviously, but I do think he played pretty well tonight in his minutes, especially the first half. He started off really hot. He had, I want to say, 6 points at the under 16 timeout, maybe. Offense looked pretty good going through him. I know Terrence Shannon Jr. was doing a lot on his own. Coleman was hitting a lot of threes, but the offense did look pretty solid in the first half with Ty Rodgers playing point guard most of the time. And then the second half, like towards the end of the game, it definitely didn't look bad under Domask. I'm sure he's not going to be playing point guard in extended minutes this year, but that's just another option. If Moretti's not ready, if DGL is having a rough stretch, if Sincere's having a rough stretch, whatever it is, having Domask available at that point guard position is definitely going to be pretty key for the Illini. Just having depth all around is really key, and we saw that tonight. I think we had 12 guys play, like all the scholarship players, obviously. Some only played a few minutes, but that's great to see because you look at Kansas, I don't think they showed all their cards tonight, really. They had like some 5-star freshmen not even touching the court tonight. But yeah, having depth in this conference, just a really tough conference, and we got obviously 3 or 4 really tough non-conference games on the slate too. That's going to be really key for Brad Underwood and this team.
Yeah, Damask was kind of the primary ball handler late, but I did think they ran a lot through Coleman tonight. I think, we're going to see a ton of that. I think it's clear that we're going to see a lot of offense run through Coleman. In fact, I think he might be your primary creator on this team. We saw a ton of him in the high post again. Obviously, we saw that dime he threw to Harmon on the cut. Just a big time decision from a guy he put in his hands. Another broken possession late where he crossed up Hunter Dickinson, hit a step back three over him. I mean, if he's doing that, Illinois is going to be really good. And if he's making that step back shot, Illinois is going to be a really good team. But they ran a lot through Coleman, and Coleman was just awesome tonight. I mean, he was just awesome. Only 4 for 11 from the field, but those 4 makes were all threes. I thought, the 3-point shot looked really fluid tonight. It looked really good, and defensively, he was the best. He was best defender on the court. I mean, he was causing some problems. You saw when he wasn't on the floor, the 11 minutes he wasn't on the floor, where it was night and day defensively. I mean, Kansas was getting whatever they wanted at the rim. Danger didn't have a very good night defensively in his 10 minutes. When Coleman was out there, he's just your anchor there. He's switching things, but he's also just, he's taking up space in the paint. I mean, he was bodying Hunter Dickinson at times. He was contesting Kevin McCullough's attempts to get to the rim. I mean, he's such a defensive anchor of this team. And I thought tonight he was great. They ran so much through him. He made a lot of really good decisions. And overall, I mean, that the one guy we haven't spotlighted here early on in the show is Coleman, and I think he's deserving because he looked like the Coleman Hawkins that we know when he's at his best. He looks like that. He looks like he makes the impact that he made tonight. And
he does so much that doesn't show up on the stat sheet, doesn't show up on the box score. If you're a real Illinois fan, I know Brad Underwood says this every offseason, but Coleman really just runs this team, and the difference when he's on the court and off the court, it is night and day, like you said. I know there's some guys on Twitter, there's some analysts that talk about it, but if you watch every Illinois game, you'll know exactly what we're talking about. For sure. Coleman missed 10 or 11 minutes tonight, and those minutes, there was one stretch, I think, in the second half where it got really shaky, or maybe it was late first half, I don't know. We had Harmon on the court, I think Dane and some other guys, and the offense just looked like nothing was happening. And then the defense, of course, it's just so much different. Coleman can guard 1 through 5. He takes the stress off so many other people, the young guys when they're in. It's just night and day. He's just really underappreciated, and I think he's due for a big year. Probably going to be the second option on offense, which is going to probably increase his stats, another big jump from his sophomore year to his junior year like he had. I'm sure he'll have another one of those this year. It's going to be really fun to watch. I think Illinois fans definitely need to appreciate this guy more while we still have him.
Yeah, I mean, there were 2 stretches. He came off the court in the first half. Dane Danger came in. Dane Danger was getting abused in the pick and roll. I mean, that's when Dickinson started 1 for 5 with that banked in 3. And then he finally got going late in the first half when Coleman was off the court, abusing Danger in the pick and roll. And then in the second half, when Kansas was kind of making their little run there to get back into it, Brad was trying to buy Coleman a breather on the bench. Kansas, couple easy buckets. I think they evened it up at 68 at that point. Coleman comes back in, and Kansas scores 7 points the rest of the night. I mean, you saw the impact when he was on the court versus off the court. And offensively, you make a great point there. I think a lot of the stagnant possessions came with Coleman off the floor as well, because he is a steadying presence on that end where you run a lot through him through the high post, you put it in his hands, and he's grown a lot even towards the end of last year. I mean, there were points early in his career where he was out of control. The decision-making was a major question mark for him. At this point in his 4th year, I mean, he's probably the most trusted decision maker with the ball in his hands Illinois has. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how much Illinois runs through him, because so far in the 2 exhibitions, we've seen a ton of it, and he's been great. He's looked great in both games, and the 3-point shot for him, if he can shoot it like he did tonight, Illinois is going to be fantastic. Now, we know how streaky he is from 3, so I'm not going to read too much into this. I want to see a full season of this type of shooting, but the shot looked great tonight. The pick and pop game a couple times. I mean, Ty Rodgers found him for another pick and pop tonight that looked beautiful. He obviously created one on his own late in the game, which is, it was the no, yes. Okay, he made it, right when he's putting that one up. But if he can shoot it like tonight, all of a sudden he's an all-conference first or second team guy. I mean, that I want to see it play out, but that was really encouraging tonight. I do want to talk briefly about Dane Danger, who only played 10 minutes tonight. On the flip side of things, from the big front, I've thought through this a lot during the offseason of what does the best version of this team look like, and I keep finding myself thinking, well, it's Coleman Hawkins playing the 5, because I think you have a lot of different options around that. You can run a lot of things through him. You can let him thrive defensively at the 5 as opposed to guarding quicker guys at the 4. Not that he can't do that, but I think you're at your most effective defensively with him at the 5. But also, I just think you have so many different lineup options with him at the 5 offensively. You could play the smaller lineup where you completely space it around Ty Rodgers with a Goody, Damask, and Coleman in the game. Quincy, I think, fits really well next to him as a 4-man. And Danger tonight, again, I think Dane Danger still can be a really big-time contributor for this team, but it just wasn't working for him in his minutes tonight. Brad recognized that. He didn't really let it play out a whole lot. He treated it like a real game. Dane Danger didn't have it tonight. Kansas was exploiting him, pulled him off the floor, played his best 5, which included Coleman there at the 5. It's something to monitor for sure going through this season, because I think Dane Danger in the right matchup can be really good. But I start to question, especially on a night like tonight where you are facing even in elite big, even in a matchup where you think maybe this is a matchup where you're going to need Dane because you're playing an elite big man. I thought Kansas exploited that. So it's something for me that I am going to be looking for early in the season, especially in that Marquette game. How much is Dane Danger going to play? Because I think it does look a lot different with Coleman out there at the 5 and Danger. As much as I think he's a good player with a bright future, like it just, the fit has not looked great with him out there so far.
Yeah, and if you watched every game last year, you'll know it's not really anything new. Like Dane had games where he had 20 and 10. He was the focal point of the offense. Like the offense was kind of running through him in the low post. And then there were also nights throughout the Big Ten slate where Dane is like tonight, he's got 9 minutes. Maybe he's in foul trouble, stuff like that. And the offense is running through somebody like Coleman or maybe Matt Meyer last year. And so, yeah, I think it's going to be an issue again this year because I don't think anything has changed with Dane really. I know he's slimmed down a little bit. Free throws are still a concern. He hasn't really been able to expand his game, at least in terms of what we've seen already. Like he's not going to the 3-point line or anything. He's not really hitting mid-range jumpers. So when Dane's in, he's kind of clogging up the paint, which is going to be an issue with if Ty Rodgers is point guard, if Sincere Harris is in. So yeah, like you're saying, the path to minutes for Dane isn't going to be the same every night. It's going to be kind of matchup dependent. We're going to have to see is Dane hot early? If he gets in around like the under 16-minute mark, does he get a couple buckets, maybe a block, some rebounds? So it's going to be a night-to-night thing, I'm pretty sure. So we're just going to have to monitor that. I mean, if Coleman is really hot, like he was tonight, he's hitting threes, he's locking down his matchup like Dickinson. I really don't know if Dane Danger is going to be playing too much. Maybe he comes in as like an offensive spark for a couple minutes. We just try to get a couple buckets through him if the offense is stagnant with Coleman out there. Maybe Coleman needs a breather and Dane comes in, like you're saying. So it's really going to be something to monitor every night, especially early in the season with these great matchups like Marquette, Tennessee, FAU. And as we get into the Big Ten slate, you're playing Purdue early, you're playing MSU, Maryland early. Those are maybe the top 3 teams. They've all got pretty solid big men. You got Edey, of course. You got Dante Scott on Maryland still, which is crazy. I don't know how he is still there. Xavier Booker, the freshman on Michigan State. They've got a pretty solid rotation of bigs too. So it's definitely going to be something to watch every night.
Yeah, I for sure. Few more takeaways from this one, and then I do want to get to some people on Twitter because we tweeted out, as we will most weeks, asking for some thoughts from listeners, and we're gonna hit on some of those. But as a team, Illinois 11 of 27 from 3, 41% tonight. Very encouraging. Now, most of that came from Terrence and Coleman, who hit 9 of the 11. We know those guys are pretty streaky, so I'm not going to say the 3-point shooting's fixed. Both those guys were shooting it great tonight, but Only 2 made threes from the rest of the guys. So I want to see, Luke Goody didn't make a 3 tonight. I think that's not going to happen most nights. You only had Marcus Damask make 1 tonight. I think he'll make a few a game. So I don't know if I have a grand takeaway from the 3-point shooting tonight, other than your top 2 guys were red hot, and that was great. The free throw shooting, though, 21 to 32, 66%, continues to be an issue. I think you survived it tonight, but man, this team's just got to figure out how to hit 75% of their free throws. I mean, it's just. It is pretty frustrating. Yeah, obviously you had Moretti 0 for 2, Danger 1 for 4, Rogers 1 for 2. You did have Shannon 7 for 10, Guerrier 8 for 10. But man, the free throw shooting I think is going to continue to be a concern as we go through the season. And that didn't really get fixed tonight. But yeah, I mean overall I think. Want to see this play out a little bit more for a lot of these things. I think, my grand takeaway from this one is very encouraged that Illinois went and knocked off Bill Self and the number 1 team in the country. Shannon and Hawkins, super encouraged by them, super encouraged by the transfers. I'm not going to sit here and say, well, Illinois is a national title contender after this one. I want to see some of these things play out a little bit more.
I will say, obviously, this is an exhibition at home. We got a great crowd. Take things with a grain of salt, sort of like the Ottawa exhibition. But in terms of last year, our 2 marquee wins, UCLA and Texas, both of those games we were down, I want to say 15 plus, and it took sort of miraculous comebacks to win those 2 games. Tonight, did Kansas lead tonight? We kind of controlled that entire game, it feels like. I'm not sure if they even led at any point.
That's a really good question. I can't recall. Maybe early, maybe very, very early in the game.
Maybe
8-7 or something. Just something like that.
Still.
But you're right.
Yeah, Illinois controlled that game pretty much from start to finish, which is really encouraging. And also first half to second half, there were some rough stretches towards the end of the first half, it got a little shaky. Towards the end of the second half, around the 8-minute mark, it got a little shaky. But just that overall consistency is something to watch this year for sure.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think while you don't want to read too much into this one, I mean, Illinois looked like the better team for 40 minutes tonight. And I think that was – for sure. I mean, this is preseason number 1 team, and Illinois controlled the game, like you said. I don't recall a point where Kansas led other than maybe for a few possessions in the first 5 minutes. I mean, I'm trying to think back to how the beginning of the game went, but from the 10-minute mark of the first half on, Illinois had leads pretty much throughout and held on to that. Kansas tied it a couple times late, but Illinois looked like the more experienced, more connected team than the number 1 team preseason. And, while I don't want to make any grand conclusions in terms of how the season is going to play out from this one game, I think you bring up a great point in that, that shouldn't be taken lightly. And it's a really, really encouraging sign. And again, some of the same things that we talked about last week from the Ottawa game, where this just looks like a much more, poised, experienced, connected. The ball movement was good. There are a lot of differences that you can clearly see from early on in last season and even late in last season. I mean, it looks like a team that fits better together, plays well together. You don't have certain guys who everyone knows who those certain guys are that are, the ball stoppers that just possessions are going to stop with them. You don't really have that this year. I do think, while there were certain possessions tonight where I thought the ball movement was really good, and I think overall this team has been really encouraging in that aspect, I do think there were times tonight, and rightfully so for the most part, in terms of Terrence Shannon, Coleman were playing really well. You let them, Terrence had a couple ISO situations where he just took the ball and went, and I'm fine with that if he's having the night like he had tonight. But Illinois did only have 8 assists on 25 makes tonight, so it wasn't quite as, as pass happy as the Ottawa exhibition was. And I thought there were some possessions where things stalled out, and the point guard concerns surfaced a little bit, but I'm not going to nitpick too much from a game where you beat number one. I think overall there's a lot to be encouraged about. And yeah, I mean, I'm not going to blame you if you're a lot higher on this team after watching that game, because at the end of the day, like I said at the beginning, it felt like, it's one thing if Kansas was playing their 12th stringer for 15 minutes and Bill Self was, making no adjustments and guys were, jogging around out there and it was an exhibition. And I mean, we had guys chirping at each other. We had guys, Kevin McCullough got hurt because Quincy Guerrier dove on top of him late in the game. I mean, it felt like a real game. You had real rotations for both teams. I mean, Kansas's starters all played 25 minutes. Illinois starters all played 25 minutes. So, yeah, I mean, I won't blame you if you want to get excited over it. I still want to see a lot of these positive trends play out over the course of the regular season before I get too high on this group. But encouraging stuff for sure.
Yeah, I'm just reading through some of the replies to our takeaways tweet right now.
Yeah, let's do it.
A lot of it is just maturity and like consistency, selflessness, like experience, which is what we've been talking about. It's what we saw against Ottawa. It's what we kind of expected coming into the season. You bring in 3 pretty high level transfers, 3 really experienced transfers, and you pair that with Coleman, who's a senior. Terrence is a super senior at this point. It's going to be night and day from last year based on what we've seen so far, which is really encouraging. Just reading some more confidence, poise, team cohesiveness, experienced, unselfish. People are noting the poor free throw shooting, which it's going to be a concern, but I don't know.
Yeah, let's read through a couple of these.
A fight for the Big Ten title.
Yeah. Well, let's highlight a couple of these individually. We had Drew said unselfishness, less stagnant on offense, more movement, ball not getting stuck. I think there were certain possessions where that happened. Again, certain possessions where it was for good reason because the ball got stuck in Terrence Shannon's hands because he was cooking out there at 28 points and they couldn't stop him. So I'm not going to complain when the ball gets stuck on a possession like that. But yeah, I think just the fluidity of the offense has looked pretty good. And that's, again, without Illinois not showing their full arsenal on that end of the floor in 2 exhibition games. And it still has looked that way, which at times last year, when they started last year, where the storyline was like, we're going to play this 5-out, unstructured offense where guys are just going to make plays and we're going to play positionless. And it was, you had the Texas and UCLA wins, which, like you said, you had to come from behind in those games. For the most part, it didn't look very good early on in the season. This year it does, and obviously you have more structure with this group, but I think it has looked a lot better. And yeah, you mentioned the maturity aspect. That's in 3 of these. You had Hoodie Season says depth and maturity are the 2 biggest takeaways from that for me. Gary says the maturity we have over last year is night and day. We have depth. I feel 3 Illini have not improved any from last year. So he's saying only 3, I guess, is the point there. But yeah, Dwayne says confidence, poise, and team cohesiveness are all up. The team has the potential to be special. Looking forward to the regular season more than I have been in a while. But yeah, it's a common thread is that even early on in these games, it feels different. It feels the cohesiveness, the togetherness, the poise of these guys, the fluidity of the offense. It all looks a lot better than what we saw for most of last year. And that's probably the most encouraging thing that I've seen in these 2 games.
One last thing I want to point out before we move on to some Big Ten talk. First game, you see Marcus Domask kind of not take over, but kind of the highlight of the game, was great on offense. And then today you see Quincy Guerrier kind of take over and played a lot better than we were expecting. And so that's 2 of the 3 transfers that have each had a really good game so far. And you saw last year, like we keep saying this, but last year it was kind of random. Is this guy going to take over tonight? Is this guy going to go 10 for 15 tonight? Or is he going to be terrible and be on the bench? I think there's going to be less of that this year because you have 2 stars. You've got Coleman, you've got Terrence, but now you've got just like a group of really solid role players that can be that third option each night. It could be somebody different every night. It could be the same guy a couple of nights in a row. But it's going to be really fun to see, and I think it's going to lead to a lot better team basketball this year.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point. And last comment I'll read to transition us. Anthony, like you said, says this team will give Purdue a fight for the Big Ten title. I do want to do some Big Ten predictions because we're approaching the college basketball season. We're a week away from regular season basketball. Next week, I think we're going to talk more about the regular season. I'm working on getting us our first guest here on the show to talk some Illini hoops, so I'm not sure if we'll have time for it. Let's do it in this episode where we both watch a lot of Big Ten basketball. We both consider ourselves Big Ten ball knowers. We'll let the listeners decide after hearing our predictions. I have a couple bolder ones, so we'll see how people feel. But let's go through. Let's just give some Big Ten standings, all Big Ten teams, player of the year. I mean, unless I think we're pretty obvious choice on that one, unless you want to make a bold claim here that Terrence Shannon's going to win it, which I would love if you did. I can't quite get there. And any other, maybe we can go through a couple of the other awards and any other maybe miscellaneous predictions we have. Let's hit on the Big Ten. Let's preview the Big Ten a little bit because I think it's important to see what this conference is going to look like this year. I'll let you start. Let's start Big Ten standings wise. We'll go through 1 through 14 in a second, but just to start things, your preseason Big Ten champion. Are you going with the defending champs in Purdue, or are you going somewhere else?
I'm not going to make a prediction for like the tournament, but regular season, I'm going chalk. I'm going Purdue.
I am as well. I think Purdue is.
Yeah.
It's just you can't really convince me that a team with Zach Edey on it is going to lose more than 5 Big Ten games. And I think 15-5 gets it done. It's a team built for the conference. We saw it last year. Yeah, they had a couple losses on the road here and there, but it's just overall they're going to dominate. I can't get there with anybody else. And like you said, yeah, the tournament I think is a different story, but yeah, I'm rocking with Purdue as my champion as well. How about 2 through 14 for you? You can kind of go through it.
All right. 2 through 14. I'm kind of torn after the exhibitions today. I don't want to put too much stock into it, but yeah. I do still have Michigan State number 2. They ended up playing fine. They looked terrible at the start. They were down like 20-3, I want to say. So I have Michigan State 2. Number 3, I have Illinois. So I'm pretty much all chalk so far. But number 4, I've got a bit of an interesting pick because I've been a hater of this team the past few years. But I've got Wisconsin at number 4 getting the last double bye. I like their roster. Like they return.
It's the first time I've ever heard you say I like their roster.
Yeah, I don't actually like their roster that much, but I think they always perform in the Big Ten. Besides last year, they kind of stunk it up. But yeah, they return Hepburn, Crowell, Asijian. They add AJ Storr, who I may or may not have him on my All Big Ten first team for some reason. So
sneak peek.
I'm high on Wisconsin this year. Yeah, I feel like every year the Big Ten media they go chalk, and then every prediction I see is like pretty much the exact same as the media poll. And then the final standings, there's always at least one sleeper team that goes from like 8 or 9 to double bye, like top 4. And then after Wisconsin, I've got Ohio State. I think they return a lot. They also add some pretty solid freshmen. They add Jamison Battle from Minnesota, which was a really interesting move over the offseason that didn't really get talked about too much. I feel like he's a really solid player. Number 6, I've got Maryland, who they also return a lot. They add some guys as well. They've got Jameer Young, who's preseason first team for the Big Ten. Dante Scott returns as well, the Illini killer. Number 7, I've got Indiana. Just getting into the middle here, I go 7 Indiana, 8 Northwestern, 9 Michigan. Just pretty. I think they'll be pretty average teams. Northwestern's got Boo Buie. Indiana brings in. I'll be honest, I don't know how to say his name, Kalel Ware, and they've also got the Taco Bell freshman dude. Don't know how to say his last name either.
Mackenzie.
I think they'll be pretty mediocre.
Mbako Bell.
Mbako Bell, yeah. I think Indiana and Northwestern will probably sneak in the tournament, and then it gets kind of questionable with Michigan at number 9. So I have I would say probably 8 Big Ten teams in the tournament this year, and then maybe a couple more depending on Michigan at 9, Iowa at 10. Maybe they get some key non-conference wins, but I think they'll be pretty mediocre in the Big Ten Conference. 11, I've got Nebraska. 12, Rutgers. I'm pretty low on Rutgers this year. I think the Big Ten media poll had them somewhere in the middle, like 8 or 9. I've got them at 12. I think losing Mulcahy, losing McConnell, losing some other guys is like really key, and people aren't talking about that enough. Like those guys pretty much carried the team for 4 years with Ron Harper and Geo Baker and other guys like that. And then at the bottom, number 13, Penn State. They lose pretty much their entire roster from last year. They lose their coach as well. And 14, Minnesota.
Interesting. We have some disagreements for sure. But yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any, this team, everyone's picking 12th. I have them 4th. Like that, there's nothing, I don't think, overall, there's a general sense of tiers in the conference that I think we're both kind of aligned on. I do have things shuffled around a little bit, so I'll go through mine. Obviously, Purdue first. I'm with you that Michigan State's 2. I think that's the consensus top 2. Until somebody jumps either one of them, I think you got to have those 2 top 2. I mean, Michigan State brings back one of the best backcourts in the country. I have some questions about their front court and losing Hauser. Are they really number 4 in the country? I'm not quite sure I'm there. But I do think preseason number 2 in the Big Ten for them. 3rd, I have Maryland. So I'm higher on Maryland than you. I think this is going to be a really good Maryland team. They get Jameer Young back, high-level point guard. Julian Reese, I think, has gotten better every year. I think he could be one of the better bigs in the conference this year. Dante Scott is just a veteran that's pretty tough matchup for a lot of teams. And then their freshman class is outstanding. It's really talented with Deshaun Harris-Smith and Jamie Kaiser, 2 really high-level freshmen that I think are going to make big impacts. And they get Jordan Geronimo from Indiana as well to fit in that starting lineup. I'm really high on them. I think Young's going to be great. And the continuity there, I think they have the potential to push those top 2 teams a little bit. 4th, I have Illinois. I do think Illinois is a top 4 team in this conference preseason, and tonight only reinforces that. And like you said, I'm not trying to, get too high over an exhibition game, but yeah, maybe I feel a little better about Illinois being in that top 3 or 4 after tonight's performance, but I do have them at 4. 5th, I got Ohio State. I'm high on Ohio State too. I think Bruce Thornton is going to be the breakout star in the Big Ten. He was awesome down the stretch last year. I think he's going to be a stud this year. They had 2 other freshmen who came on late last year, in Roddy Gale and Felix Akpara. They get battle, like you said. I think that's going to be – this is a team that missed the tournament last year. I have them 5th. It's pretty bold, but I think – I think they have a much improved roster, and they have such a young core that I think are all going to take significant leaps this year. 6th, Wisconsin. I just couldn't bring myself to have them 4th or 5th. Like I do agree with a lot of what you said. I don't love every year. It's like I don't love any of their individual pieces very much, but they're gonna be solid. Like they're inevitable. They're gonna ugly some games up. They're gonna win 13 to 14 conference games or whatever it is. They're inevitable. I've accepted that at this point. I know they were down last year, but I think the AJ Store addition and bringing all those guys back who have played together for a while will get them to 6th. I just can't bring myself to rank them any higher. 7th, I'm going with Iowa, which is I feel like it's going to be another Iowa team that's just awesome offensively, horrendous defensively, and at the end of the day, they're 7th in the conference. Like I think that's kind of your prototypical Iowa team of the last couple of years. There's some question marks on their roster for sure, but I think Perkins is pretty good. They get Creek as a transfer, pretty good. I trust them more than any of these other teams because I think one thing about Fran McCaffrey is he's going to have probably the best offensive team in the conference. So that's a given. 8th, I'm going with Michigan. I don't love their roster, but I think it's getting a little bit underrated. I think they're more talented than a few of these other teams with McDaniel, with Kamwa coming in from Tennessee. Namari Burnett coming in from Bama. I think it's been a little bit underrated. Both of us, I think, are on the same page that we don't trust Juwan Howard as a coach at all. But even with him there, I think it's a roster that with another coach, I'd be a little bit higher on. I think it's enough to at least be 8th in the conference, and I think they sneak into the tournament. 9th, I'm going Rutgers. I think their roster doesn't jump off the page at me, but it's just, again, it's a track record thing with Peichel teams. Like, they're going to be really good defensively. They're going to play so many ugly games. They're going to win a lot at home because it's a really tough place to play. And at the end of the day, I don't think they're going to be bad enough to be a 12th, 13th place team, because I think they're going to win enough with their defense and with I think they have some guys that could step up and score. They bring in, I'm trying to remember the name of the transfer they brought in from UMass, a guard who I think could be a contributor for them, and then Amori. Fernandez, yep, that's it. I think he could be a pretty solid player, and then Amori, I think getting him back gives you at least some type of floor, especially on the defensive end for them, which we know Peichel is a staple of his teams. This is the boldest one for me. 10th, Indiana. I so low on Indiana this year. I think they're going to miss the tournament. I think as talented as some of their individual pieces are, the roster fit together is awful. Like, they have 2 guards who are capable of playing in the Big Ten to me, in Johnson and Galloway, and they have no one behind them. Xavier Johnson's coming off a major injury. Their front court, I think, doesn't fit well. Like, Khalil Ware, talented piece, but now you're playing him next to Malik Renew, who's coming back. He can't space the floor at all, so you're clogging things up inside there. I don't like that fit very much. Mbako is talented, but he's a reclass guy that I think is going to struggle against some higher level competition and take some time to adjust. And also, I think they're kind of playing him out of position a little bit with how many bigs they have. They're going to slide him more to the 3, even the 2 sometimes. I don't think that's where he should play. The fit of Indiana, I hate. That's my boldest prediction in the Big Ten this year. Indiana finishes 10th. And we have a Indiana podcast on this network too, where if they hear this, they'll probably hate me. But it's just, I don't love the fit of this team. I don't. It's one of those classic. I think back to Illinois last year a little bit, like talented pieces that just the flow is bad, the fit is bad. I think they have the potential to be that. 11th, I'm going with Northwestern. I think they were kind of a one-off last year. Bowie's great, but losing Audige, I think, is going to hurt them a ton because he was that second scorer that took a lot of pressure off of Bowie at times, and now I think Bowie's going to be asked to do too much, and the pieces around him they don't scare me at all. 12th, I'm going Nebraska. 13th, Penn State. 14th, Minnesota. Thoughts?
It's pretty similar throughout. A couple switches up with, you got Iowa and Wisconsin. You're pretty higher. You're higher on Maryland than I am. I don't mind it. I do think Northwestern where'd you have them? 11, I want to say.
11. Yeah.
11. Yeah. I don't mind that, honestly. I do think Bowie he might average 20 a game this year, and I think that propels them to a couple more wins than you'd expect. But yeah, I don't mind it overall. I think top 2, not surprising, Purdue and Michigan State. It's hard for me to put Illinois over Michigan State. I kind of want to. I do this every year. I kind of overrate Illinois a little bit in the preseason. We saw it tonight. They controlled Kansas throughout the whole game. I don't want to put too much stock into it, but it's going to be really interesting towards the top of the Big Ten, assuming Purdue is number 1. But you got Illinois, Michigan State, Maryland, Ohio State, Wisconsin, whoever else may be up there. Should be really fun as always. The Big Ten always has, usually there's like a clear number 1, at least. I looked at the standings recently over the past couple of years with the 20-game schedule and with 14 teams. There's usually a clear number 1 at like 15, between like 14 and 16 wins. And then 2 is usually separated by a game. And then like 3 to 6 are usually right around 12 wins. And that's always the most fun part. Last year was a bit of an outlier. They had like I mean, 2 through 9 in the Big Ten were all around like 12 wins, which was absurd. That last day of the season was crazy in terms of Big Ten tournament seeding. But yeah, it should be really fun this year. It's not going to be a surprise if Purdue goes 9-1 or 10-0 at home and then wins probably 6 or 7 road games as well. I think they'll be clear number one in the Big Ten just because Edie is such a dominant force and they get some help from the refs at home. I can't lie. But yeah, the rest of the Big Ten,
we know
same
that
as always.
That can't be ignored ever. The Purdue Mackey experience is, they're really good. It's a great atmosphere, and there's a couple other factors. Maybe 3 that are wearing the same colors.
Yeah, 3 of them that'll ignore Zach Edey punching Matt Meyer in the face with 2 minutes left in the game.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
But yeah,
that game last year. I'm with you though.
In the Big Ten, I look at these. Yeah, I look at these teams like Purdue and Wisconsin and Iowa, who they bring in like 3-star talents, which they're less talented in terms of rankings compared to teams like Illinois and Michigan, Indiana, Michigan State. But like you've been saying, these teams with these coaches, like you got Holtman, you got Guard, McCaffrey, even Chris Collins, like they just get wins. They get scoring. They get wins out of their guys that are like 3 stars, maybe even 2 stars, like lower rated transfers. And they just always compete. And it's the same thing every year in the Big Ten. There's going to be a team that maybe steps up, like one of those 3 or 4 teams is going to step up, and they're probably going to finish top 5 in the conference, surprisingly. Maybe a team like Illinois or Michigan, who has a ton of talent on paper and a pretty solid coach, is going to underperform. Like it's why we play the games. It's why we watch it. It's why it's so fun, and it captivates us for like 3 months every year. So yeah, just really looking forward to it, like always.
Yeah, I'm sure there's going to be some surprises as usual. I echo pretty much everything you said there. I do think, preseason, you've kind of got a tier 1, Purdue and Michigan State, and then you've got another clump there, like 3 through 7 or 8 of teams that I think a certain team could jump above the rest. Another team could disappoint. Like you got Maryland, Illinois, Ohio State, Wisconsin, even, if you believe in Indiana, Michigan. I mean, Northwestern made the tournament. Yeah, there's a ton of teams there that I think are going to have to sort themselves out as usual, and I think it's going to be another competitive year. I do think it's going to be a better overall conference than last year. Last year, I think you could truly say, other than Purdue, everyone was mediocre. I think Michigan State is going to be a genuinely good team. I think a couple of these other teams are going to be genuinely very good teams. Illinois, I think, can be that. Maryland, I think, can be that. Ohio State and Wisconsin, I think, can be that. So I think it's going to be a better conference. Should be fun. Before we get out of here, let's run through some all Big Ten selections here. I know we're over an hour already, as we always seem to be, or close to an hour, as we always seem to on these types of things. And from my experience working in radio a little bit, like you say, well, we'll talk for 20 minutes here, and then 45 minutes later, you're not quite done yet. But we'll relatively quickly here, let's roll through some all Big Ten picks. Let's start with the first team, which I think maybe a surprise or 2 could slip in there. I know I have 1 surprise, but I think at least 3 or 4 of these guys should be pretty consensus. Who do you got in the first team?
The first team, I went pretty chalk, but I did want to throw a little surprise pick in there because I don't think it's going to be the same 5 as the preseason media selected. So I've got Zach Edey, who I'm going to pick him for Player of the Year too, obviously.
Yep.
Zach Edey, I got Terrence Shannon Jr., Tyson Walker from Michigan State. I think he's getting slightly overrated in this preseason, but I do think he'll still be first team All Big Ten pretty easily. And then I've got Jameer Young from Maryland, who's going to be probably around 20-point per game scorer. I think he was 16 or 17 points per game last year. And then closing it out at number 5, I've got AJ Storr from Wisconsin, which is a really surprising pick for myself. I'm a kind of a Wisconsin hater until this podcast episode, but he had some phenomenal games at St. John's last year. I think he averaged around 10 points a game. I think maybe he can play a little bit of a Johnny Davis role. I don't think he's going to be shooting like 30 times a game like Davis did 2 years ago. But I like how he fits on this Wisconsin roster, and I've got him on my first team.
Yeah, that's definitely a bold one. Yeah, I've never heard you as high on Wisconsin in my life as this show. So we'll see. We'll see how long that lasts. When they get there, I mean, they play like 3 top 15 teams early. I think they play Tennessee, they play Arizona, they play another team. Like once they beat one of those teams in a 58-56 game, annoyingly, we'll go right back to being like, oh, this team's so fraudulent, we can't let this stand anymore. But for now, we'll allow the hype on them. I got the same top 4 as you, Edey, Shannon, Young, and Walker. And similar to you, I got a bit of a surprise as my 5th one. I'm going Bruce Thornton from Ohio State. I have them 5th in the conference. He averaged 11 points a game as a freshman last year, looked awesome down the stretch of last season. I think this is kind of going to be his team this year at point guard. I think it's going to be a much improved Ohio State team, and he just really impressed me. I think he's kind of that break. You always have a couple of these breakout guys that kind of come. I don't want to say he's going to come out of nowhere if he's good, because I think people realize he's a very talented player capable of doing this. But you always have a couple of those guys on one of either the first or second team that kind of pop up there that people weren't really expecting preseason. That's my pick for that. I think Thornton is. I'm really high on what he can be. I think he can shoot it. I think he's going to be improved as a playmaker with a little bit more better fit around him in terms of pieces. And I just was so impressed with what he did at the end of last season. I'm sliding him into the first team. I'll go first on the second team then, and then I'll throw it to you because we both had a common omission from the first team that was on the preseason poll first team, pretty consensus, and that's Boo Buie from Northwestern. I mean, I have them finishing 11th in the conference, which is really why I don't have him first team. I think he's going to put up really good numbers. He's on a team where there's not a whole lot else around him in terms of go-to scoring. I think he'll be a 17, 18 point a game scorer this year, maybe with the potential to be more. But at the end of the day, I just think I have them finishing 11th. I think they're going to take a step back as a team. And so with that, I think he's going to fall to the second team. Then I have A.J. Hoggard from Michigan State on the second team as well. I think him and Walker are going to be great on Michigan State. Even if you don't fully buy in on Michigan State, I think you have to buy in on the fact that their backcourt's going to be fantastic. And I'm going Hoggard. I have AJ Storr on my second team, which I thought was even a little bit of a surprise, but you went a step further and put him on your first team, so I don't feel quite as bad for this pick. I think he is going to be Wisconsin's best player on a pretty good Wisconsin team. So I'm going with him there. I've got Olivier Kamwa of Michigan on my second team. I think he's in a spot there with Michigan where he can really take on more of a scoring load and put up some, better counting stats than he did at Tennessee. I think he's kind of one of the more underrated transfer additions in the conference. And so I have him on my second team as well. And then Cliff Amore of Rutgers. I think I don't necessarily think it's going to be a great team, but he's just such a known commodity in terms of he's going to be in the Defensive Player of the Year contention in the conference, all defensive team guy. And I think Steve Peichel is going to run a lot more through him offensively in terms of really putting him in pick and rolls and getting him lobs. And really, I think he has a chance to average, 14 and 9 and 2 blocks this year. And I think that'll be plenty to get him on the second team.
Yeah, I like those picks, but we have pretty different second teams. We've got Boo Buie in common. We both left him off the first team, but I do think however many points he scores, 17, 18 a game, that's enough to get him second team for sure. Clear leader, clear best player on that Northwestern team. And then after that, I'm surprised you did not have Casey Tominaga.
No, I can't get there on a 12th place team on a strictly scoring guard. Can't get there.
Yeah, so I have Tominaga from Nebraska on my second team. I love watching that dude play. I think just strictly his points per game and how funny he is going to put him on the second team, which might be a crazy opinion, but that's what I've got.
I know, I can see it. If he averages like 16 on like 44% 3-point shooting and is like, memed 5 times, like I could see him on the second team for sure.
Yeah, so after that, I've got Ace Baldwin from Penn State. He transfers over with his coach to Penn State. It's not going to be a great team. I don't think anybody's expecting much from them. But kind of like Bowie and Tominaga, he's going to be scoring a lot. He's already a pretty established, great player. So I've got him on my second team. After that, I've got from Ohio State, the Minnesota Trent Jamison battle. I think he's really old. He's pretty old by this point. So I think he's going to be able to lead that Ohio team, who should be much improved from last season. I think he should score a lot. He's a pretty good threat on offense. He can do a lot on offense. He can rebound a little bit too. So that's my fourth selection. And then a little bit of a surprise here because I got Indiana right in the middle of my Big Ten predictions. So I had to throw a player in there. I was kind of between this guy and Xavier Johnson, but I've got Mackenzie Mbaku. I think he's obviously a really talented freshman. He's pretty much a consensus 5-star. I would not be surprised if we see him sort of like, I know Jet Howard, obviously playing under his dad last year, was putting up like 20 shots a game, some games last year, which was absolutely insane. So I don't think he's going to be at that level this year, but I would not be surprised if Indiana is sort of running their offense through him this year a little bit. And I think that's going to be enough to put him second team possibly. And as for my third team, starting off the third team, I've got AJ Hoggard from Michigan State, kind of 1-2 punch with Walker and Hoggard. I think he'll pretty easily be an all Big Ten player. I've got him a bit lower than you on the third team, but obviously really fun to watch, really great player. And then I've got Bruce Thornton from Ohio State. I'm expecting a pretty big leap from him this year. He does a lot really well on offense. He should be running that Ohio State team pretty well. Like I've got them number 5 in the Big Ten, which is a huge leap from last year. I think they were 13. After Bruce Thornton, I've got another guard, Fletcher Lawyer from Purdue. I think he'll probably be the second option on this Purdue team last year. I know he kind of was last year, but I think that'll be his role will expand a little bit this year as a secondary ball handler. He's a pretty good playmaker. He's also a pretty solid shooter. I think all his numbers will improve pretty significantly this year. Fourth, Cliff Murray from Rutgers. He's just, ever since he's been at Rutgers, he's been really solid. He's just an athletic freak, like they mention it every broadcast, but it's true. It's pretty obvious. Just insane dunks. He's the best player on that team by far as well. So I think he'll be third team. And then finally, showing a bit of love to the Illini guy, I got Coleman Hawkins. I think I mentioned last podcast episode, I wouldn't be surprised if he's third team All Big Ten. So that's what I've got in my predictions. Just expanded role on offense, elite defender. I think the media, the coaches, the Big Ten media, they'll recognize a little bit more this year. And I've got Coleman Hawkins on my third team.
It is crazy how different our second and third teams are because and I think it speaks to kind of, you have that top tier of players, the star caliber guys, the returning guys, and then there's a lot of unknowns in terms of, how big is the role of X going to be, how big is the role of Y going to be, how big is it's interesting because our first team was so similar with one surprise from each of us, one kind of bolder pick, and I think we have 2 combined agreements on the second and third team. We both have Bowie on the second team, and we both have Coleman Hawkins on our third team. That is our agreement on this one. I'm with you on that. I think he's going to do enough alongside Terrence, and he's going to be the clear second option on this team. I think he is going to finally be an improved 3-point shooter, and he's shown it already in a couple exhibition games. He's looking to score a little bit more, and I think the counting numbers will be there for him. And I know Illinois team I expect to be towards the top of the conference. I think that'll get Coleman there. As for the other 4, we differ again. I'm going Ace Baldwin on my third team. I know you had him second team. I just think he's going to be really good. I just think with Penn State, I think he's going to be pretty awful as a team. It's going to be tough for voters to put a guy on such a bad team second team. I think his counting stats will be worthy, but I think he'll sneak onto the third team instead. I got the other Purdue guard, Braden Smith, on my third team. I think as a freshman last year. He had his struggles, especially late in the year, kind of ran out of gas and struggled, especially under pressure in the backcourt late in the season, had some turnover issues. But overall, I mean, I know a lot of it in Purdue there. If you play point guard with Zach Edey on the court, you're gonna look good. I mean, it's pretty tough to look bad in that situation. But I mean, Braden Smith was an underranked freshman last year who I thought was pretty darn good for most of the season. Now as an offseason to improve, and you're playing with Zach Edey, so you're gonna pad those assist numbers, playing pick and roll with Edey, throwing lobs to Edey. I mean, it's just I think he's gonna have the numbers, and I think he actually may end up being the second leading scorer. I think Fletcher Lawyer could be, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's Braden Smith. I also have Deshaun Harris-Smith. So you were high on Mbako as the freshman. I'm going with him as the freshman of the year in the conference with Maryland. I think paired next to Jameer Young in the backcourt, he's just super talented, electric scorer. He's going to be one of those like Bryce Sensabaugh types to me from last year, where he's just a professional level scorer as a freshman. That's what I've seen from my time looking through and diving into him a little bit. I think he could have a pretty big year and sneak onto the third team. And then my last pick, I'm going with Khalil Ware from Indiana. I'm going to bank on the talent there, a former five-star guy. Mike Woodson loves playing through big men offensively. And we saw how much Trace had success there the last couple of years. I think we're going to see Khalil Ware be the focal point of Indiana's offense, and I think he has a chance to put up the numbers worthy of being Indiana's all Big Ten representative. But yeah, man, we were all over the place on those second couple of teams, so should be interesting. I can't wait to watch some Big Ten hoops.
For sure. Starting off in, early December, and then it really picks up early January.
Yeah, you got those.
So much fun to watch every night.
Yeah, and all these teams are going to be playing high-level non-conference games in November too. I mean, you think about, is Michigan State in Maui, or who's in Maui? From Big Purdue, maybe? Is Purdue in Maui? And then I think you have some
Purdue
Michigan
is somewhere,
State.
yeah.
Michigan State's in one of the events. I think Michigan's in Atlantis. Obviously, we have the 3 big non-conference games for Illinois. I mean, we're going to see all these teams in action. And then, yeah, you mentioned most teams play 2 games in early December in conference play, and then it really picks up in January. I know Illinois only plays 1 in early December, but college hoops is close. When we're making predictions, conference predictions, it means that we're really darn close to college basketball. I can't wait. Any last thoughts for this very long episode 2?
I'm just thankful Hunter Dickinson has officially moved to 0-5 against Illinois in his career. That's all I've got to say.
Isn't it just, I mean, can we talk about too? I mean, the foul that he had in the second half. I mean, what are we doing, man? That guy just, that guy wants to be despised by all of Champaign, Illinois. It should have been a flagrant foul. I forget who it was on, but he's just, I mean, he wants to be a heel. He wants to be a villain. We'll see how that goes for him at Kansas. I think he's going to be pretty darn good with Bill Self this year, but luckily Illinois will always have the 5-0 bragging rights. And again, this one absolutely counts. If Illinois had lost, it wouldn't have, but we're counting it now after Illinois wins. That'll do it for us on this episode of the Champagne on Ice podcast. Again, make sure follow our Twitter at Champagne on Ice. We're going to be posting. I guess I did realize after last week I said Twitter a couple times, but it's technically X now. I think everybody like me still calls it Twitter, but I guess I should be proper and say go follow us on X, because that's what we're calling it now. Thank you, Elon. At Champagne on Ice on X/Twitter. Subscribe, Field of 68 Podcast Network, YouTube. Give us rating, review on all the podcast platforms or on Apple Podcasts. We're working to get on Spotify. Right now, we're having some trouble with that. But for all you Spotify listeners, we're working on it. For now, we're on Apple and Google Podcasts. Hope everybody has a great week. We'll be back next Monday, which will be the day that Illinois tips off the regular season, and we will break it all down, do some more preview, and may even have a guest join us. So be sure to tune into that one.